Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Hugh McKay and I'm president of the board of directors of the City Club. Today's speaker, Diane Ravitch, was an early advocate of No Child Left Behind, testing-based programs, school vouchers, and charter schools. Dr. Ravitch, as a renowned and well-respected figure in the education world, had been involved on the ground floor of much of this thinking. From 1991 to 93, she was Assistant Secretary of Education under President George H.W. Bush, and she was responsible for the Office of Education Research and Improvement in the U.S. Department of Education. As Assistant Secretary, she led the federal efforts to promote the creation of voluntary state and national academic standards. From 1997 to 2004, she was a member of the National Assessment Governing Board, overseeing the federal testing program. But Dr. Ravitch changed her mind, to put it mildly, on the direction of school reform, as we shall hear. And in changing her mind, she sounded a call to action that has caused widespread rethinking of many assumptions, sacred cows, and prevailing theories in the education world. Dr. Ravitch is currently Research Professor of Education at NYU and a Senior Fellow at the Brookings Institution. She's author of numerous noteworthy books on education, including The Death and Life of the Great American School System, How Testing and Choice Are Undermining Education. In addition, she has edited 14 books, and she's written more than 500 articles and reviews for scholarly and popular publications. Dr. Ravitch has been elected to membership in numerous prestigious professional organizations, including the National Academy of Education, the Society of American Historians, and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and many others. Dr. Ravitch has received major awards from the National Education Association, the New England Association of Schools and Colleges, the American Association of School Administrators, and the American Academy of Political and Social Science. And she has received honorary degrees from 9 colleges and universities. A native of Houston, Dr. Ravitch is a graduate of the Houston Public Schools. She received a BA from Wellesley College in 1960 and a Ph.D. in history from Columbia in 1975. This past December, Dr. Ravitch received the Spirit of America Award from the National Council for the Social Studies, recognizing, quote, a person that has followed their conscience and acted against current thinking in order to stand up for equity, freedom, and the American spirit of justice. It is fitting that Dr. Ravitch is here at the Citadel of Free Speech. Please welcome to the City Club of Cleveland, Dr. Diane Ravitch.
Thank you so much for inviting me today. My only concern when this was arranged last August was I was sure there would be a blizzard. So thank you for providing the sunny weather and this wonderful reception. As it happens, my youngest brother, I have 5 brothers, my youngest is married to a daughter of the legendary Maurice Saltzman of Cleveland. And I mention this because he's a man who grew up in an orphanage in Cleveland and went on to become a leader of the business and philanthropic community. And I ask, having driven through East Cleveland and Cleveland yesterday and seeing children growing up in third world conditions, how can we restore the same sense of hope to young people today? In the early 1990s, I worked as Assistant Secretary of Education in the administration of President George H.W. Bush. That was a very exciting time. The Berlin Wall had just fallen, and foreign policy experts said it was the end of history. Now they said every nation in the world will follow our lead. Every nation will turn democratic and adopt a free market economy. But unfortunately, as we now know, history did not end, nor did wars or dictatorships. In education, too, we thought we had all the answers. After I left the federal government, I worked in 3 conservative think tanks, the Manhattan Institute, the Thomas B. Fordham Foundation of Dayton, and the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. And then as now, conservative think tanks believed that testing, accountability, and choice would solve the problems of our education system. Some said that choice alone was the silver bullet. Competition, we thought, would make our schools better and better, and with enough competition, our schools would be at the top of the international charts. I cheered when Milwaukee adopted vouchers in 1990. At last, we would see a demonstration of the power of choice. I applauded as state after state passed charter legislation. I testified for charter legislation in New York State in 1998. It was going to create a free market for school providers. I was happy when No Child Left Behind was signed into law a decade ago. Now, after 10 years of No Child Left Behind, after 20 years of state-level accountability, after 21 years of vouchers in Milwaukee, now we know. This approach hasn't worked. It didn't work. It failed. Conservative think tanks are still arguing for choice, testing, and accountability, but these are no longer new ideas. This agenda is the status quo, and it's crushing the spirit of learning and innovation in our schools. Federal law, NCLB, and billions of federal dollars, the Obama administration's race to the top, which you had the unfortunate, which you won, unfortunately, along with my state, unfortunately. All of this money and these federal laws promote choice, testing, and accountability. The ideas hatched in the conservative think tanks a generation ago are now federal policy, and it's not the wave of the future. It is the status quo, and the status quo is not working. About 5 years ago, I came to realize that the ideas I had so vigorously supported were wrong, that they were not working. The Fordham Foundation sponsored charter schools in Ohio, as it still does, and every year we learn that almost every one of these brand new schools, supposedly a silver bullet, was an academic watch or academic emergency. And I saw that because of NCLB, more and more districts were cutting the arts, were cutting physical education, were cutting history, were cutting everything but test prep, test prep, test prep. I concluded that I was wrong. And as the evidence continued to accumulate, I realized that the school reform agenda of the 1990s was not producing the results that we had hoped for. I concluded that we were on our way to ruining one of the major institutions of our democratic society and doing nothing to improve education while squandering billions of dollars on testing, on paperwork, on consultants, and on incompetent private managers. Today's reform movement supports the principles of NCLB and Race to the Top. The reformers want to double down on the failed strategy of testing, accountability, and choice. They demand more testing, more firing of teachers, more closing of public schools, more private management. But the evidence says they're wrong. They want schools not to be a public service, but a market-based institution. Because the reformers think in corporate terms, I call them corporate reformers. They want parents to be consumers, making choices. They want children to be products, shaped by the demands of the school. The test scores are the profits and the losses of the business. The teachers are supposed to be employees who have no rights, no seniority, who get rewarded for higher scores or fired for lower scores. Schools are supposed to close and open like chain stores selling burgers or shoes. The corporate reformers want to transform public education as we know it. They want to change it from a community institution with doors open to all to a privately managed, deregulated private sector activity funded with government dollars in which the school frequently does the choosing. In state after state, they're winning. In Ohio, they're winning. About 5% of the children in the state now attend a privately managed charter school. About 20% of those in Ohio's Big Eight. This is a rich market for private entrepreneurs, and your governor wants to push privatization faster and further beyond the urban districts. There's big money in privatization, but it's not better education there. The corporate reformers believe that the teacher is solely responsible for whether scores go up or down, and that's simply wrong. The teacher accounts for 10 to 15% of student performance. Family, and especially family income, affects 60% of student performance, according to most of our economists. The reformers believe that we will reach world-class achievement by closing low-performing schools, firing teachers, firing principals, and ruthlessly weeding out the teachers who are unable to produce ever higher scores. Not only is this narrative false, it's a radical agenda. It is destroying public education, which is one of the mainstays of our democratic system of government. It took almost 200 years to build public education, but the corporate reform movement is intent on tearing it down in a single generation. I don't want to be part of this. This is a tragedy. Every high-performing nation in the world has a strong public education system. Those that do not have vast inequalities built into their society with no mechanism to provide equality of educational opportunity. The free market works very well in providing goods and services, but it is not the right way to operate essential public services. The free market has many virtues, but it does not produce equality. It produces winners and losers. As we learned in the fall of 2008, the free market is not kind to losers. The goal of our schools should be, must be, equality of educational opportunity, not a race to the top. The top of what? We should treat every single child as a unique individual because he or she is a unique individual. We should do this not because we want to win a global competition, not to be economically competitive, but because we want to be a decent society where everyone has an equal chance to reach his or her potential. We must not throw away the life of any child. Education is not a competition. Education is not a race. It is a long, slow, incremental process of development. There is no finish line until you die. Education should prepare each of us to make our way in the world, to do the best that we can. No Child Left Behind marked a sea change in American education policy. NCLB is the worst federal education legislation ever passed in our history. I say that advisedly as a historian of education. The pressure to raise test scores every year has promoted cheating, gaming the system, teaching to the test, and narrowing the curriculum. Many schools and districts have eliminated the arts, eliminated physical education, eliminated other subjects because they're not tested. The only thing that counts is reading and math. NCLB federalized control of public education. Washington decides what happens in public schools across the nation. Washington puts up 10% of the cost of education, and Washington holds the reins of power. That's wrong. We have a federal system of government. We do not have federal control of education, or we're not supposed to, but we do now. No one in Congress or the U.S. Department of Education knows how to reform the schools of Ohio or Nebraska or Maine or California. They don't know. NCLB mandates that all children in grades 3 through 8 must be proficient in reading and math by the year 2014, that magical year. That is an impossible goal. It's one that has never been met by any nation in the world, and it will not be met by any state in this nation. At present, more than half the public schools in our nation have been labeled failing by federal standards. In Massachusetts, which is the highest performing state in the nation, 80% of the schools in that state are considered failing schools. This is ridiculous. In Illinois, the state's highest performing high school, New Trier High School, has been labeled a failing school. This is absurd. If the law is not changed, by 2014, nearly 100% of our public schools will be failing schools. Public education may be closed down and privatized by will of Congress. Has any national legislative body in the world ever passed a law guaranteed to stigmatize every public school in the nation? I don't think so. Now Secretary Arne Duncan has offered waivers to any state that wants to escape NCLB's timetable of destruction. But to get those waivers, states must agree to accept his mandates instead of NCLB's. And he wants more privatization and more high-stakes testing. NCLB was based on George W. Bush's campaign claim about a supposed miracle in Texas. Test everyone, post the scores, reward the schools that get gains, embarrass those that don't. When you do this, he claimed, the graduation rates go up, the test scores go up, and the achievement gap narrows. Unfortunately, none of it was true. But it sounded good, and so we now know there was no Texas miracle, but Congress bought it by overwhelming majorities and passed NCLB, and I call NCLB the death star of American education. The law is all sticks and very few carrots. When a school can't meet the impossible targets of NCLB, the sanctions get progressively worse each year, with the ultimate sanction being fire the principal, fire half or all of the staff, close the school, convert it to a charter, or turn it over to private management. None of this is based on research or evidence, not a single bit of it. There is little or nothing in the law to support or encourage the educators who work in our schools. What there is fear, humiliation, sanctions, and punishments ending in firing and closure. Of course, Congress should repeal NCLB. It should replace it with federal policy that supports equity for the neediest students. That was the original purpose of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, to support equity for the neediest students and to promote a sound education for all students. Congress shouldn't tell schools how to reform because Congress is not competent to tell schools how to reform. That is beyond its purview. Last spring, Bill Gates told the nation's governors that children should have larger classes, but he wouldn't tolerate that for his own children. Bill Gates and Arne Duncan both said that districts should not pay teachers more for master's degrees or experience. But try to explain the logic of this. How will our schools improve if our teachers have less education, less experience, and larger classes? I don't get it. Now we know. Now we know that vouchers failed to make a difference in Milwaukee. As I said before, they started in 1990. 21 years later, students in the voucher schools in Milwaukee do no better on the state test than students in the regular public schools. Vouchers were supposed to help African American students. Competition was supposed to help everyone. It was supposed to be the rising tide that lifts all boats. But now we know that African American students in Milwaukee have the same low scores on the federal assessments as black students in Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, and across the Deep South. Competition was supposed to improve achievement in all sectors, but after 21 years of competition, Milwaukee is one of the nation's lowest performing districts on the federal test. Competition did not improve public education and did not help African American students. Race to the Top promotes privatization. It requires states to open more privately managed charter schools if they want to be eligible for Race to the Top funding. It requires them to establish merit pay programs, to evaluate teachers by student test scores, and to agree to transform low-performing schools. Transformation sounds like such a swell idea, but it turns out that transformation is just like the sanctions of No Child Left Behind. Transformation means that all or part of the staff will be fired, or that the school might be turned into a charter school, or closed and replaced. And behind all these strategies is the same tired old formula: testing, accountability, and choice, now getting a little bit long in the tooth. Arne Duncan applied all the same supposedly transformative policies when he was superintendent in Chicago. Every evaluation of his program, which he called Renaissance 2010, has concluded that it made very little difference. Many schools were closed, many schools were opened. Only 18% of the new schools have been rated better than the old schools by the state. And most children who transferred from an old, low-performing school transferred to a new, low-performing school. An African-American student fell even further behind. Many millions of dollars were wasted, and now the same failed policies are being imposed nationally by Race to the Top, and billions will be wasted paying consultants and testing companies and closing schools and opening schools and firing teachers and creating vast storehouses of data. Closing schools is not a reform. If there's too much crime, we don't close police stations. If there are too many fires, we don't shut down the fire department. If schools close their doors, communities are destabilized and fragmented. Closing schools does not help immigrant students learn English, nor does it narrow the achievement gap. Public schools are, and they should be, vital community institutions, not transient agencies that come and go as their test scores rise or fall. Some reformers think that mayoral control is the answer. If that were true, Cleveland should have the best schools in the nation. As you know, Cleveland has had mayoral control longer than any other district in the country. You know it's not the answer. Detroit tried mayoral control and abandoned it. New York City's Mayor Michael Bloomberg used to boast about historic test score gains under his leadership, but those amazing scores happened because the state education department happened to be lowering the passing marks on the state test. And when the state admitted it in 2010 and recalibrated the scores, the New York City miracle disappeared overnight. In one sense, Race to the Top is even worse than No Child Left Behind. No Child Left Behind held schools accountable. Race to the Top holds teachers accountable. Its demand to judge teachers by student test scores will lead to even more narrowing of the curriculum, even more cheating scandals, and even more teaching to the test. Judging teachers by student scores is wrong. It violates a basic rule of psychometrics, which I learned when I was on the National Assessment Governing Board for 7 years. The test publishers said again and again, tests should be used only for the purpose for which they are designed. A test of fifth grade reading is a test of whether fifth graders can read. It's not a test of the teacher. Student tests are not measures of teacher quality. A few months ago, I visited Finland, which is one of the world's best school systems. Its students rank at the top of international assessments. Students in Finland never take standardized tests until they apply to higher education. The students take teacher-made tests. The national curriculum consists of broad guidelines. assuring that every child has a full program in the arts and sciences, not detailed prescriptions that tell teachers how to teach or what to teach. Finnish teachers are all required to have a master's degree. Admission to teacher education programs in Finland is highly competitive. Only 1 in 10 who want to teach are accepted. Teachers have 5 years of education. They're prepared to help all children learn, including children with disabilities. They are respected professionals, and they're trusted to act as professionals. Finland has no alternate routes into teaching, nothing like Teach for America. And there is one other crucial difference. Less than 4% of the children in Finland live in poverty, as compared to more than 20% of the children in the United States. We are number one in child poverty in the developed world. This is a scandal. One other thing, all the Finnish teachers are members of a union, the same union that the principals belong to. And it's one of the highest performing nations in the world. What a world of difference from American education, where we test everything and everyone because we trust no one. And the more we test, the more we can't even trust the measures themselves, because there are so many incentives to game the system, to avoid the kids who might get low scores, to teach test-taking tricks, and even to cheat. Officials in Washington, D.C. and Atlanta boasted of their test score gains, but cheating scandals have tarnished their claims. We know more about Atlanta because the governor sent in independent investigators. We're still waiting for an investigation in Washington, D.C. I do not mean to suggest that testing is bad. Testing itself is not bad. The problem is that tests today are misused. They should be used for diagnostics. They should be used to help teachers and to help students, not for handing out bonuses or firing teachers and closing schools. When the stakes attached to tests get too high, people focus on the wrong goals. The tests are not scientific instruments. They're created by humans. They're subject to measurement error, to random error, poor wording, poor scoring. And the more we emphasize multiple choice, standardized testing, the more we squeeze out every last drop of creativity, originality, innovativeness, critical thinking, and ingenuity, the very attributes that we need for our nation's success in the 21st century. The corporate reform narrative relies on the rhetoric of decline. They say our public schools are bad and getting worse, and only the private sector can save education. They're wrong. They're wrong. We have only one national measure, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, a federal testing program that began in the early 1970s. NAEP, as it's called, shows that there has been steady and substantial academic progress over the past 40 years. Achievement has not declined. In fact, black students made the greatest gains, especially in the 1970s and the early 1980s. No one knows exactly why. Maybe it was desegregation, maybe it was smaller class sizes, maybe it was the resources of Title I and other federal programs, maybe it was early childhood education, maybe it was economic opportunities for black families, maybe it was all of the above. The black-white achievement gap that existed in the early 1970s was dramatically reduced. In some grades and some subjects it was cut in half. Since the 1980s, when states began imposing the accountability agenda, progress in reducing the achievement gap has stagnated. But what about those awful international test scores? Isn't it terrible that our students rank only in the middle? Shouldn't we be number one? When the latest international test scores came out in December of 2010, Secretary Duncan said it was a wake-up call to the nation. President Obama said that it was our generation's Sputnik moment. But wait a minute. The first international tests were given in the mid-1960s, and we came in 12th out of 12. We were last. Over the past half-century, we've usually ranked in the middle at best, or in the bottom quartile, but never at the top. The corporate reformers apparently don't know this. Last year in his State of the Union address, President Obama pointed out that our economy is the largest in the world, that we have the most productive workers, the most inventors, the most patents, the most dynamic businesses, the best colleges and universities in the world. Surely, the 90% of our population that graduated from our public schools had something to do with these successes. Now, I'm old enough to remember the real Sputnik in 1957. Sputnik went up the year after I graduated high school. That's when the Soviet Union launched the first space satellite. The media said we were doomed. They said it was all the fault of our lousy schools. They said the Soviets would beat us because their science and math education was so much better than ours. But they're gone and we're still here. How can that be? Because we believe in freedom and opportunity, and individual creativity and ingenuity, not compliance and 5-year plans and standardization. One other thing you should know about the international test. On the last one, in December of 2010, the PISA exam, American schools with less than 10% poverty had test scores significantly higher than those of Finland, Korea, and Japan, first in the world. The U.S. schools with 25% of their students in poverty had scores equivalent to those of Finland, Korea, and Japan. As the level of poverty rises in the schools, the test scores fall. If we could reduce poverty, we would see higher test scores across the board. But the corporate reformers don't want to talk about poverty. They prefer to believe that schools alone can solve the problems of social inequality, and they're wrong. They're demoralizing our educators and wreaking havoc on our schools, our teachers, our principals, our students, and communities. Of course there are problems in American education. Of course our schools must be improved. The corporate reformers have identified the wrong problems. They're wrong in their analysis and they're wrong in their cures. We're not going to solve our education problems by doing more of what we've been doing for the past generation. We need fresh thinking. The single most reliable predictor of test scores is family income. Poverty is the problem that drags down academic performance, not bad teachers. It's the elephant in the room. The more poverty, the lower the scores. The more affluence, the higher the scores. Children from affluent homes are likely to have educated parents, books in the home, access to health care, good housing, economic security, basic nutrition. All these things matter. We know they do. They matter to children's academic performance. Charters are not the answer to the problems of American education. There are now more than 5,000 of them, with over 1.5 million students. That's about 3%, maybe 3.5% of our nation's students by now. And there are excellent charter schools. I've met wonderful charter school leaders who are trying to do the right thing to help the kids with the greatest needs. There are some totally dreadful charter schools. I've seen them too. But study after study has shown that on the whole, there's no difference in performance between children in charter schools and children in regular public schools. Some of the charters are run by responsible organizations. Some are run by entrepreneurs who want to make money. Some are run by incompetents who shouldn't get public money and shouldn't be in charge of children. And some succeed because they skim the best kids out of the poorest communities and exclude children with special needs and exclude children who are English language learners. From the Stanford Credo study of 2009, we know that 17% of charters perform better than a neighborhood public school. 37% perform worse, 46% no different. There has been study after study that comes to basically the same conclusions. Cyber charters, the electronic schools, they are the worst of all. They have the worst performance, the worst graduation rates, and there have been by now many exposés of the scams of cyber charters, of which you have a few. As of 2011, Ohio had 326 charter schools. They do not perform any better than the regular public schools. Again, the Stanford Credo, which is a center associated with the Hoover Institution, which is usually a charter-loving place, but it's run by a very responsible economist and team of economists at Stanford. They did a study of Ohio charters, and they concluded that the reading scores are not significantly better in the charter schools than in the regular public schools, and the math scores are significantly worse in charter schools than in regular public schools. Now, math scores are more influenced by school differences than reading scores are, because reading scores heavily reflect home background. Ohio's charter legislation has been influenced, as you all know, by campaign contributions from charter sponsors, especially by sponsors who run for-profit charter schools and who take ownership of everything purchased for the school with taxpayer dollars. This is wrong. Ohio has cyber charters. These online schools make millions for their sponsors and deliver an inferior education. In Ohio, the e-schools have collected over $1 billion in tax revenues over the past decade and gotten terrible results. Most of Ohio's e-schools have a lower graduation rate than the public schools of Cleveland. Of 23 e-schools graded by the Ohio Department of Education, only 3 were rated effective. That's 8%, as compared to 75% of traditional public schools across the state. This is a hugely profitable business, however. Why are you wasting your taxpayers' money in the children's lives this way? I don't get it, Ohio. Some reformers say that the unions stand in the way of good education, but the highest scoring states in this country are Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New Jersey, all of which have strong unions. The lowest performing states are the right-to-work states. You may soon be joining their ranks. There are, of course, unionized districts that have low performance, and in virtually every case that I know of, these are districts that have high poverty and high racial segregation, and that is a toxic combination, whether it's unionized or not unionized. Merit pay is an interesting concept that has been tried again and again since the 1920s. I call merit pay the idea that never works and never dies. The most definitive test of merit pay was done at Vanderbilt University from 2007 to 2010 by a group of economists at the National Center for Performance Incentives. And they decided that the reason merit pay had consistently failed over many decades was because the bonus was not big enough to incentivize teachers to work harder. So they had a bonus of $15,000 for teachers that could raise test scores. And over a 3-year period, they watched and they sliced and they diced the data and concluded in September of 2010 that the bonus made no difference, that the teachers without the bonus got the same test scores as the teachers who were eligible for the bonus. The problem with merit pay is that it destroys the collaborations necessary for a successful school. It destroys teamwork. Everyone starts thinking of what's in it for me, not how do we work together to make things better for the children. Merit pay failed in New York City on a school-wide basis from 2007 to 2010. Now New York City is going to go and try the plan that failed in Nashville. We never learn. Last May, the National Research Council, our most prestigious, most august research body in this country, released a 9-year study that concluded that tying incentives to test scores doesn't work. It doesn't raise achievement, and it incentivizes bad behaviors such as score inflation, cheating, gaming the system. There's a growing body of research showing that performance bonuses actually reduce motivation. Daniel Pink, in his book Drive, has summarized the new cognitive psychology that shows that people work harder and work better when they're motivated by idealism, when they're motivated by a sense of purpose and autonomy in their work. And they work actually worse when they're motivated solely by a bonus, because it destroys the idealism and sense of purpose that gives them a real sense of energy and charge. The corporate reformers claim that teachers never get evaluated. They say that teachers should be evaluated by the scores of their students, but testing scholars say that these measures based on test scores are inaccurate, unreliable, and unstable. The ratings will change from year to year depending on which students were assigned to the class, over which the teachers have no control. If there's a different test that's used, the ratings will change. My colleague at NYU, Sean Corcoran, did a study of the value-added metrics in New York City and in Houston, and he discovered there was a huge margin of error. A teacher rated at the 43rd percentile might actually be at the 15th percentile, or it could be at the 71st percentile. That's the margin of error. So you would be quite accurate to say, you could quite accurately say that that teacher was average, above average, or below average. All three statements would be true. Houston, using its value-added method, fired one of its teachers of the year. A teacher who's effective one year may not be effective the next year. There are too many factors beyond the control of teachers. Those who teach children with special needs, those who teach ELLs will get low value added, and teachers will quickly learn to avoid those children. It's too challenging. The best way to evaluate teachers is by experienced professionals, not by test scores. That's what other professions do. The reality is that teaching in the United States is a revolving door. 40 to 50% of all teachers who start the profession are gone within their first 5 years. No other profession has this kind of high turnover. We're losing good teachers. We're losing experienced teachers. We must do more to recruit very well qualified people into teaching and to support them once they're there and to keep them. And the teacher bashing now so commonplace in the media and from some of our leading public figures must stop. And here's an alarming thought. I was recently in California where I saw Linda Darling-Hammond, and she gave me some federal data about teaching. The modal year of experience for teachers in 1988, and by modal year I mean the year in which the most teachers are, the modal year was 15 years of experience. There were more teachers with 15 years of experience than any other group. The modal year of teachers 20 years later, that's 2008, is 1. That means a lot of experienced teachers are leaving. We can't afford that. This is a national tragedy. We cannot afford to continue demonizing our teachers and driving out our experienced teachers. You cannot have a decent organization when the senior person in the school has only 4 or 5 years experience. We cannot lose our people who know the tricks of the trade and the craft and the art of teaching. Is it true that 3 great teachers in a row closes the achievement gap? No, it's not true. It's sheer speculation. No district has ever done it. Michelle Rhee didn't do it in the District of Columbia. On the federal test, the District of Columbia, 4 years after 4 years of Rhee's chancellorship, has a staggeringly large achievement gap between black and white students, the largest in the nation. The black-white achievement gap is 60 points in the District of Columbia, whereas in most urban districts, the average for urban districts tested is 30 points. It's double the national average. The D.C. test scores were rising for 4 years before she arrived in D.C. They went flat in 2009 after she implemented her teacher evaluation program. She didn't succeed in D.C. Why is she promoting this formula to other districts? I don't get it. The goal of education is not to get higher test scores, but to produce well-educated citizens, to sustain our democracy. This means that every child should get a full and balanced curriculum. A good education is one that includes the arts and history and foreign languages and the sciences and civics and physical education and time for play. A good education happens when teachers are treated with respect as professionals and given the support and autonomy to do their job. Many states are cutting the budget for education, lowering standards for entry into teaching, evaluating teachers by the scores of their students. Some are cutting arts and physical education. Some are eliminating collective bargaining rights, and they call all of this reform. But this is not what the top performing nations in the world are doing. We are on a path of ruining our schools. 10 years of NCLB have not improved education, and the ideas behind Race to the Top have no support in research and evidence or in practical experience. We must strengthen the education profession. Teachers should be better educated and better prepared for the challenges of today's classrooms. They should view teaching as a commitment to a career and not as a brief experience. And they need your support and they need your respect. We need better instruction that uses all the technology at our command and relies on the wisdom of skilled teachers, not replace them. We need assessments that ask students to demonstrate what they know, not just to pick one of 4 boxes. We need to address the multiple disadvantages of poverty by supplying prenatal care to every woman who can't afford it. This would reduce learning disabilities. We should provide a high-quality early childhood education to narrow the achievement gap that exists on the first day of school. We must make sure that every child arrives in school healthy and ready to learn. School and society are intertwined. To the extent that we improve our schools, we improve our society. But we cannot improve our schools without removing the obstacles that poverty imposes on more than 20% of our children. We should try to lose our first place status in terms of child poverty. It's a scandal. It's incomprehensible that the richest nation in the world cannot supply a good school for every one of its children. That is a vision worthy of our best efforts. History will judge us by what we do today to make that vision real for every child in Cleveland, in Ohio, and in this country. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we're listening to a forum featuring Diane Ravitch, research professor of education at NYU and author of The Death and Life of the Great American School System, How Testing and Choice Are Undermining Education. We will return to Dr. Ravitch momentarily for the traditional City Club question and answer period. Please formulate your questions now, and please remember to keep them brief. We remind you that you're all welcome to attend all City Club forums, and we hope all of you who are not already members will please join the City Club. You can visit our website to see upcoming programs and also to see how to become a member. That's www.cityclub.org. Please go to our website. We welcome all of you here and those listening to WCPN 90.3 FM, WCLV, WTAM, or one of the many radio stations across the country. Our television broadcast partner is WVIZ PBS Idea Stream. Television broadcasts of City Club are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Our live webcast is supported by the University of Akron. This year, the City Club is turning 100 years old. We're planning a number of great events, and we'll be actively soliciting support from the community through our campaign for a new century. Please visit our website, again, for all sorts of information on our 100th and other events. If you wish to make reservations for upcoming programs or to order a CD or DVD of today's program, please call 1-888-223-6786 or 216-621-0082. We're pleased to welcome guests at tables hosted by the Cleveland Teachers Union and the Greater Cleveland School Superintendents Association. Thank you for joining us today. We're also pleased to welcome students who are here as part of the City Club student program. Participation of these students is made possible by a generous grant from the Charles E. Spar Charitable Trust. With us today are students from John Hay High School, New Tech West, and Gilmore Academy. Will students please stand and be recognized? Now we would like to return to Dr. Ravitch for our traditional City Club question and answer period. We welcome questions from all of you. Holding the microphones today, we have City Club Program Director Carrie Miller and 100th Anniversary Assistant Director Betsy Wallace. First question, please.
Dr. Ravitch, I now know what you're against, but I'm not sure what you're for except for maintaining the failed status quo of our schools. And your comments on eliminating poverty first, when we know that to blame it on the children might not be the right answer, and when we have high-performing minority poor children in some of our high-performing charter and public schools that outperform the best schools in the region that are not poverty-stricken.
Well, sir, I don't think you attended to my speech because what I said was we can't do one or the other. We have to do both. I didn't say we should ignore school improvement. I'm opposed to the status quo. The status quo, as I spent some minutes explaining, is testing, accountability, and choice. And I don't think it's working, and I don't want to repeat my speech. The reason that some charter schools get high scores is because they exclude children with disabilities and they exclude English language learners. Some of them are really great schools, but the research is clear. You can read it on the State Department of Education website. You can read it in any number of studies, including the Credo study of Ohio. The reading scores are no different. There's no gains in reading scores in charter schools in Ohio. And the math scores are significantly worse in charter schools than in regular public schools. That doesn't mean, and I said there are some high-performing schools, there are some very low-performing schools. There are more charter schools in academic emergency and in academic watch than there are regular public schools. Thank you for your question.
Dr. Ravitch, you described a world that you know well of research and data, and then you talked about policy which seems to be going in a different direction. Why is it so hard, in almost a cosmic, a very kind of global sense, why is it so hard to get the world of policy to listen closely to the world of research?
Well, I'd say that there's a clear reason. It's because there's so much money driving the policy. There's so much money, if you think about it, the Gates Foundation, the Broad Foundation, the Dell Foundation, the U.S. Department of Education, the Republican Party, now even the U.S. Department of Education, are wedded to testing, accountability, and choice. It's the same agenda. It's not a new agenda, by the way. This is the traditional Republican agenda. It was the agenda in the Bush administration from 20 years ago. This is nothing new. We need fresh thinking. It's very hard to get through because there's a lot of money going into campaign contributions. For instance, in Pennsylvania, one of the charter operators was the single biggest contributor to the governor who won election in 2010. Same thing is true in Ohio, where you have major campaign contributors who are charter sponsors. It's hard to turn that around. K-12 and some of the other cyber charters make campaign contributions to legislators. We have a problem deciding whether we're trying to enable people to make money on schools, cut the public schools' budget, or whether we're really concerned about educating our children and having a better society. I'm trying to take a stand for educating our children and having a better society, but on the other side are the people making campaign contributions to build up their portfolio. And, you know, it's a different view of the world. I'll stick with the kids and the teachers.
during your talk, you commented that, over here.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
During your talk, you said almost every charter school in Ohio is an academic emergency. I submit to you that is not correct.
No, I didn't say that. I said that I was a trustee of the Thomas B. Fordham Foundation.
I wrote down what you said.
Okay.
Almost every charter school in Ohio is an academic emergency.
No.
False. My question is, how would you reform the financing of public education in order to make it work better?
Okay, first of all, let me correct it if you misunderstood me. I said that when I was a trustee of the Thomas B. Fordham Foundation, the Fordham Foundation began, which is in Dayton, began creating or sponsoring charter schools, not creating them. And our belief was that charter schools would be a silver bullet. What we found each year as the reports came in was virtually all of the charter schools that the Fordham Foundation was sponsoring were an academic emergency or academic watch. I did not say that most or all of the charter schools in Ohio are. I said that there is a wide variety, but the research shows that there are some excellent ones, there are some terrible ones. On the whole, they not only don't perform better, they get worse math scores than the regular public schools, but that's on the whole. That doesn't say that there aren't some excellent ones. I'm sure there are some excellent ones, and I'm sure there are some that just don't take the low-performing kids or who push them out and send them back to the regular public schools. I think that public schools should be funded so that all children can have a good education. And in some schools will require more funding than others, depending on the needs of their children. But I think that schools have to operate within the context of the society that they live in, meaning that if children have to have early childhood education if their parents can't supply it. There are all kinds of needs that communities have that must be supplied, in most cases, by the public purse if the families and the communities are unable to supply it. I think that's what decent societies do. I think that's what many of the nations that we look to very enviously do. They take care of their children. They see the children as an investment in the future, and they say if we want to be a good society 20 years from now, we better make sure that all of our children are well educated, and they don't reduce children simply to test score data based on reading and math tests.
I've got a question from Twitter here. It asks, what lessons can we learn from the Waldorf system of schooling?
Well, the Waldorf system of schooling puts a tremendous emphasis on the arts. And it's very child-centered. And I think there's a lot to be learned from that. I think the most important lesson is that we must supply children with a motivation to come to school. They must find joy in schooling. And the Waldorf system believes in that this is the key motivation for students. So I think there's quite a lot we can learn from that. And I'm glad you mentioned Twitter because I want to invite you all to follow me on Twitter at Diane Ravitch, at Diane Ravitch. I learn a lot about what's happening in Ohio from my Twitter friends in Ohio.
Good afternoon. My question, I was wondering if you were aware of any reform or transformative effort in the United States that has been driven by educators or by parents and was creative or proactive as opposed to reactive. You mentioned Sputnik, and I'm a Sputnik child, and I remember new math, new social studies, and then it was abandoned. So do you know of any efforts that were creative as opposed to reactive and involve teachers and parents in the embryonic stage?
Well, you know, what's very difficult these days is for anyone to deviate from what the federal law requires. So what I hear from teachers wherever I go is, I want to have the arts. I want to be able to give my children the joy of learning, but all we do is test prep. And if I don't do test prep, I could be fired. So my response to them is, you're like a spider trapped in a web, and it's a web not of your making. But, you know, the best advice I can give is just try the best you can to do what you know is right. And it's so hard because teachers know that what they're doing is not right, and they don't want to do it, but they're forced to do it. The one community that I saw that I was impressed by recently was San Diego. And in San Diego, they have something called community-based school reform, where they've made a conscious effort, the teachers, the parents, the administrators, the district school board, the civic community, working together. I mean, every solution to education always involves collaboration. I was very impressed when Hugh McKay told me about the work that his law firm is doing, sending in lawyers to work and teach civics in the schools. And they stick with this. They do it week after week, and the kids love it, and the professionals love it. That kind of collaboration should be multiplied 1,000-fold in the city of Cleveland and in every community. That's what makes schools work. It's not the testing that makes schools work. It's not the data that makes schools work. The data is just a representation of reality. It's not reality. Reality is people. Reality is people working with children and giving them hope for the future. That's what works.
What I think is so hard for many people to see are the ways that privatization and the theory of privatization school reform damages our most vulnerable school districts. I wonder if you'd sum up how this so-called reform strategy hurts our most challenged public schools, the children they serve, the idea of public education, and the common good.
Well, gosh, I could just restate your question. I live in New York City, and New York City has a very entrepreneurial sector that is creating lots and lots of charter schools. And now they're moving out of the impoverished communities and into affluent communities where there's a lot of pushback. And what's happening, whether it's a poor community or a middle-class community, is the communities are fragmented. They're fighting over space. They're fighting over resources. Who gets what? The children, and they're often co-located in the same building, and the children in the charter school, because they have very wealthy philanthropists backing them, get more resources, better technology, nicer everything. And it creates in the children left behind, because after all, it's only a minority of the children that get into these schools. Even when they're bad schools, it's still a minority of kids who are in them. It creates a sense of division. The very thing that I said in responding to your question, which is we all have to work together around the children of the community, now you have the parents fighting one another, the charter parents versus the regular public school parents, the charter teachers versus the regular teachers, the old teachers versus the new teachers. Education is fundamentally a collaborative activity. It's not a competition. It's not a struggle for survival. It's the adults gathering together to help the young grow up to be responsible people in our society. So I think this is the greatest harm that's come out of the thinking that we're all so locked into, that somehow education is going to emerge from a life-death struggle. It should not be this way. It should be built on collaboration, teamwork, adults taking responsibility for young people.
Hi, I represent Menlo Park Academy, which is Ohio's only community school for gifted children, and I'm not here to make an advocation for community charter, which are public schools, but for the special segment audience which this school serves, which are gifted students. So we hail students from over 40 school districts in this area. Ourselves are an excellent rated school district. I wish we didn't have to exist, but No Child Left Behind has eradicated and cut gifted services and programmings and serving students who are at the top echelon in their schools. So what do we do about that to ensure service within traditional public school districts versus in community public schools?
Well, I think that it's one of the tragic byproducts of No Child Left Behind that the focus is on 4 levels, from top to bottom. And the focus is on getting the kids at the second level to move to the third level. So the kids who are at the top level are neglected, and the kids who are at the very bottom are very often written off because it's too hard to move them, and it's easier. People talk about the bubble kids, moving the kids across that bubble. That's wrong. What I would love to see in a better world would be schools in which we didn't look at children in terms of what their test score is, what their ranking is, what their rating is, who's high and who's low, but rather, what are the needs of this child? How can we make sure this child has the education appropriate for him or her? How can we find the child who is zooming ahead in math and make sure they continue zooming, or the child who's gifted in the arts and has more opportunities to engage in the arts, and make sure that all of our kids have what they need? I have frequently said when meeting with teachers, what would you do differently if you didn't know what the children's test scores were? And it kind of shakes people up because they haven't had an opportunity to think about that now for 10 years. And it's an important question.
Dr. Ravitch, appreciate your poignant comments. I guess my question would be related to collaboration, quality, and then specifically Cleveland. You've quoted a lot of cities and things that are happening that are either good or bad, and certainly not here to argue that because you have your research there. With Cleveland, there's some exciting things happening. We have a group of high-performing charter schools called Breakthrough Schools actually working with the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. They serve as the authorizer for those schools. All those schools are rated excellent or excellent with distinction, and we're receiving national and statewide attention for that replication. So from the mayor's office, from the superintendent being Eric Gordon, from the leaders of the charter movement, the philanthropic movement, significant collaboration towards this. The issue still lies, though, even though we've gone from 54 to 63% in terms of a graduation rate, we still have 36 37, of 100 children that aren't graduating from high school. I guess based on that context that I hopefully provided in Cleveland, what would you suggest we do in terms of charter schools, high-performing ones that is, the district, the philanthropic community, and then the policy advisors, so we can get it so we can have 100% of our students graduating from high school? Some comments on that, please.
Well, here's what you need to think about, and that's the original purpose of charter schools, because I was there in the beginning. And in the beginning, it was Albert Shanker drawing a diagram on a napkin. And what he said was, and he was the first advocate for charter schools, he said, supposing a group of teachers went to their colleagues and said, we want to find the hardest to educate kids. We want to find the dropouts, the kids out on the street. We want to find the lowest performing kids. We want to find the kids whose heads are nodding at their desk. Those are the kids we want. You keep the high performing kids. We want the lowest performing kids. We want to be laboratories to find out how to reach these kids and bring them back and make sure that they want to be educated. That was built on an ideal of not only collaboration, but of charter schools addressing the neediest kids. What has happened since then, and the reason that Albert Shanker turned against charter schools in 1993, he started it in 88, he turned against it in 93, was that he saw the private sector moving in and wanting to skim off the highest performing kids and wanting to say our test scores are better than your test scores, our graduation rate is better than your graduation rate. You should be taking the kids who are graduating at the rate of 37%. You should be taking the kids who are failing. That's what charter schools should be doing. That should be your mission. Unfortunately, that's not happening.
Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we've been listening to Diane Ravitch, author of The Death and Life of the Great American School System. Thank you, Dr. Ravitch. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.